Welcome to another Get Legit webinar. This is Cultivation Compliance 101, Water Board Essentials with Marissa Bosenko. Today is Tuesday, June 10th, 2025. My name is Erin, and I'm the Education and Communications Manager here at the Cannabis Alliance. I'd like to thank you for joining us this afternoon. It is our hope that anyone interested in commercial cannabis here in Nevada County will take the time to tune into these webinars, educate themselves, and continue to be or become stewards of the environment and of our community. The Get Legit educational series provides the preparation necessary to assist in securing a local cultivation permit and state cultivation license. The series includes webinars, support groups, business skills training, and a mentor program. All Get Legit webinars are online, they're free of charge, and they are open to the public. So what is the Alliance? The Alliance is a nonprofit trade association representing the local cannabis community here in Nevada County. Our mission is to support public policy initiatives through representative advocacy, provide educational opportunities, and create space for connection within the industry and the greater community. Some services that we provide to our members are a consistent voice and representation locally and at the statewide level, monthly educational webinars to assist with the permitting and licensing process, much like the one you are on today, our buddy program to pair permitted farmers with new farmers. We have a Slack online hub for resource sharing and local policy updates, as well as seasonal supply chain industry mixers. And there are ways to stay in touch. You can become a member. And you can also become a sponsor. I will put those links in the chat, and all the services that we provide to our members just listed above. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Nevada County Alliance. Join our bi-monthly newsletter. I'll also put that link in the chat. Any additional email questions, you can email to us personally at info@nccannabisalliance.org, which I will also link in the chat. Some upcoming events we have with the Alliance. Save the date. We have our annual barbecue cook-off and cornhole tournament happening on September 18th, 2025. So mark your calendars. That's always a really fun event. Members are welcome, as well as people who are interested in becoming members of the Cannabis Alliance. I'd like to give a shout out to our allied industry business sponsors, Ag Natural, Finest, Humboldt Seed Company, California Ag Labs, Mr. B's Green Trees, Gold Coast Botanicals, and Bulk Market. We appreciate your support as always. And the format of today's webinar is a Q&A. Marissa Bosenko will give a presentation with Q&A to follow if you do have questions. Your participation is encouraged. The chat section and Q&A are there for you to use. Feel free to use them. Ask any questions that you may have, as that will make this webinar more useful for everyone. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website at nccannabisalliance.org under our Get Legit tab. I will link that in the chat as well. And then that's all from me. I will go ahead and pass it to Marissa to introduce herself. Hi,
Hello.
Marissa.
Hello. So happy to be here. My name is Marissa Basenko, and I am what's called an Associate Governmental Program Analyst here at the Water Boards. And I manage our internal data and coordinate outreach events like these. And we really want to design presentations that are helpful to cultivators and consultants. Today, what I'll be talking about is our permit termination process, as well as how to update information on the permit. And then at the end, I will be concluding with a little conversation about invoices, um, and what they fund and things like that. I'm going to try and make sure to remember to leave time for questions in between the kind of major sections. And then also I'll have a question at the end of the presentation as well. Okay. And then let me make sure, is my screen still sharing, Erin?
Yes, it is. I can see your waterboard and cannabis
Perfect.
slide.
All right, so let me update that. There we go. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time going over who the regional water boards is. Here on the map, the Region 5 is highlighted in that orange color. The state of California is divided into 9 regional water quality control boards based on 9 major watersheds. Each regional board makes critical water quality decisions for its regions, including setting standards issuing waste discharge requirements, determining compliance with those requirements, and taking appropriate enforcement actions. We frequently get confused with other state water resources agencies. So I did want to clarify that the regional water boards, we don't manage wells or diversions from water courses or drinking water. Those are all separate agencies. We tend to regulate waste discharges to protect water quality, and we're going to talk more about that in the next couple slides. So here's that map again. I also included some contact information for all of Region 5. Um, if you need to see this again, I show the contacts in our Q&A slide. But mostly for you guys, Nevada County, your contact is going to be Maggie Driver, or if you have general questions, you can always reach out to me, Marissa Pasenko. My information's on the last slide as well. Um, Janae Freed tends to be Lake County. And then anything south of that purple line is going to be our Rancho Cordova office. Um, and so again, I'll show these at the end. We also have PDF copies available of these presentations. So if you want to be able to follow the links or, have a hard copy of this, you can just email me and I will make sure to get you a PDF copy of the presentation. So today I'll be spending some time addressing who the regional boards is and what our permit covers. Then I'll delve into how to make changes or updates to your site via our change of information form. Then we will be reviewing the termination process and everything that entails. And then, like I said, lastly, we'll be going over common invoice questions. Um, if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand or unmute or put it in the chat and I'll make sure to answer those questions. So, before I get too far into the main content, I want to take a moment to make sure we're all on the same page about the scope of the permit and the general order. The Cannabis General Order is our core document, policy and requirements that our regulations are based on. It is publicly available. We have it on our website. I have it linked in this slide deck as well. If you're a current permit holder, you need to have a copy of this document, and if you're a potential permit holder, you can review this document in preparation for enrolling in a site, but it's really important to be familiar with what requirements you're signing up for. The permit does not cover the plants or the strain of plants or the number of plants or the nature of the plants. Our priorities are to identify and reduce the threat to water quality because of cannabis cultivation related activities. So let's say you don't have cannabis cultivation or cannabis plants on the ground, but you plan on cultivating cannabis on the parcel and you already have land disturbances. Land disturbances would be, an access road, grading, or vegetation clearing. This would still require a permit because of those land disturbances and the potential discharges and threats to water quality related to those activities. And another example is, if you have had a cannabis grow in the past, but you are not currently growing this year or maybe the next year for whatever reasons, but the ground is still disturbed from those previous activities, you still need to keep the permit active and follow all the requirements of the general order and pay the annual fee. So the permit covers the potential threats to water quality because of disturbed land present on the site. These could be things like soil stockpiles, chemical storage, access roads, things like that. If you don't plan on cultivating for the next year or the next few years, you are able to terminate your site. But just because you're not cultivating, it doesn't exempt you from the permit fees and the permit requirements. Until you've gone through that termination process, we're going to talk about today, which includes cleanup, you have to stay enrolled and compliant. So to kind of sum up that long paragraph, um, disturbed area, chemical storage, fuels, trash, and then of course setbacks from the water courses themselves are the main priorities of the permit because these factors present a lot of potential risk to water quality. Before I move on, are there any questions about who we are as the Regional Water Board, or what we do, or anything about the permits? Let me check the chat.
I don't see any hands raised right
Perfect.
now. But I'll let
Okay.
you.
Thank you.
Mhm.
All right, let's move on here. So first, we're going to talk about the change of information request form. We abbreviate it the COI. And this is one of our most frequently used forms. It's really common that changes happen on a site, whether it's a change to a responsible party, which is either a landowner or a cultivator. We call them the dischargers. It could be just site contact information needs to be updated, or you could be adding an APN, increasing disturbed area and cultivation area, lowering cultivation or disturbed area. And upon request, staff can process these changes to your account via this form. You can request this form by emailing the contacts I've listed on that second contact page, or it is on our website. And let me see, I have our website. Let me see if it'll let me drop it in the chat. There we go. So I just put the link to our website in the chat, and you can find contacts on that as well, but the COI form is on there. And keeping information up to date is really important part of your permit. We tend to be forgotten and people forget to update us. But your disturbed area is what calculates or informs the fees. And so if you want to increase or decrease your disturbed area, that can impact your fees. Obviously, you're going to want to have the most up-to-date contact. So if we send you letters or a bill, you get those information. So this is just a screenshot of what our form looks like. You don't need to be able to read this in detail. So you can receive this fillable version by emailing us or downloading it on the website that I've put in the chat. The form has about 5 sections, but you only have to fill out the section you're making changes to, as well as our very last section, which is a certification section. So on this form, section 1, you can make changes to that cultivation or disturbed area, or you can add a contiguous APN. Section 2 is all about responsible parties, removing them, and this could be removing a landowner, removing that cultivator discharger, or you change consultants and you would like to remove them. Um, it is important to note that the permit must always have at least one landowner and one discharger cultivator associated with the site. So if you're removing a landowner or cultivator, then you need to complete section 3, which is to add a responsible party. Section 4 is that change to the contact information. Say you're keeping the same responsible parties, but you moved or information changed, an updated email, something like that. You can just fill out that contact section and we can get that filled out. Also, you could just email us and we can do that as well. So this is the last page of the change of information form. Again, this is just a screenshot of that final section, but this must be filled out for us to complete those big changes about cultivation or disturbed area or about the removing or adding a party. This basically just certifies that all the information is true. And I did want to add that when you change the responsible parties, whether it's that landowner or that cultivator discharger, the new party and the previous party have to sign agreeing to these changes before we can finalize it. And, it sounds kind of silly, but please make sure the signatures are somewhat legible. We get some that just look like scribbles, and unfortunately, we can't verify that that person has seen this and agreed to it. So it leads to an email conversation or a phone conversation with us following up that, okay, they are aware of the changes. They did indeed sign this. Um, so are there any questions about the change of information or maybe what changes you can make? Um, and then we'll move into the termination process.
Yeah, what kind of changes are you referring to? That would be great to dive into a bit.
Yeah, okay. So on the change of information, um, Well, the most common one is changes to responsible parties. Say a landowner changes and the property is sold, but maybe the cultivator is still leasing it. We would need that most up-to-date landowner information and contact, because, like I said, every permit has to have one landowner and one, we call them dischargers. And then, say you add someone to the business, that's going to be the discharger. We can change that as well in our system. The other main area we receive changes or amendments to are the cultivation size. And this can be increasing, like if you're growing, but sometimes, unfortunately, businesses have to scale back. And so we get those reductions. Reductions do require a little bit more effort because we have to make sure that the area that was encompassed is cleaned up, mostly revegetated. There's no trash, there's no grow bags, that sort of thing. And then disturbed area, we often see that increasing, um, which means maybe you're developing a larger cultivation area, but it could be you're developing a storage area, or you're expanding the access road. Things like that are disturbed area that you could increase. Um, or if you want to decrease them, maybe you got your road up to Rural Roads Handbook or something like that. Those changes can go through this form. And for disturbed area, we tend to request photos just to make sure that if you're decreasing, it's been revegetated or whatever. Um, so those are some of the changes. And then also just contacts. We understand that people move, that phones change, emails change, things like that. And so just a really simple filling out that's a couple questions or just emailing us for contacts, we can update that really quickly in our database. And that way you're getting all the information we're sending out. A lot of times invoices come back as undeliverable, and people find out later when it's been unpaid and there's now demands for payment and there's now collections agencies involved. They find out, I never received this. Well, they had moved and it went to a previous address or something like that. So it's really important to keep that kind of information up to date, so you don't fall into those types of scenarios. And so we can get you the information we need. Did that answer
Okay.
your question?
Yeah, that did. Thank you. And then just
Yeah.
to follow up on something you said, what is revegetating or
Yeah,
what does that mean?
yeah. So typically, like when you clear a spot for either cultivation or maybe storage or something like that, there was plants that were keeping that soil kind of in place. And when you clear that, then it creates a risk of like rain or wind and all that stuff discharging it. And so it basically just means you take native seed and you spread it out in that area. Um, if you need more information on that, I can get you, Maggie Driver. I can put that information in the chat and she'd be able to give like site-specific things. But typically just make sure that if you have cleared vegetation, that you're reseeding it with native plants.
Got it. That makes sense. Thank you.
Uh, okay. So I'm going to move on to our termination section. Oh, sorry, one last thing. About this is my last comment about the change of information. When you change like the disturbed area or the cultivation area, or you add an APN, it's really important for us to have an up-to-date site map and for you to possibly update your site management plan, which is the SMP, which is due typically, I think it's 90 days after you submit your application. So just making sure we have that up-to-date map. If you have, a new cultivation area, making sure it's accounted for in that site plan or making sure it's accounted for in that map. And that doesn't mean you have to redo the whole thing. It just means revise the sections that you added to. Are there any questions about that? I don't want to go too involved in the site management plan because we have a whole different presentation on that. It's pretty detailed. Um, but just it's basically so we can get an understanding of what's going on in the site, um, the scope of the site, how large it is, where things are located. So if we ever did need to do an inspection, we have that background, and so we know that the requirements of the general order are being met.
No, that's great to know. Maybe we can do a follow-up webinar on just the site management plan. That seems like
Yeah.
a lot of information, and that would be really helpful in the future.
Yeah, it's a report that isn't required to have a qualified professional, and so you can do it yourself, but we have certain requirements for it. And so you have to kind of make sure you check those boxes in that report. And one of them is a site map. And the site map, I would say, is pretty regularly needs to be updated. People change things around a little bit. So next, we're going to go over terminations. We get a lot of questions about terminations, and so we wanted to address the process here. Um, and should you decide to terminate your site from the permit, the termination request can be submitted through the portal. But we wanted to clarify that, just calling us up or even sending an email is not going to be sufficient to terminate. There's a lot of due diligence our scientific staff have to do in order to terminate a site, and it has to be approved by management and steps I'm going to go into here in a little bit. But there's several steps necessary to complete the termination request. It's not just calling us or emailing us and saying that you want to terminate. So part of the termination process is there's about three elements. One of them is the termination request form, which you can do on the portal. The portal is what you completed your application on originally. And we understand that you lose passwords and things like that. There is obviously the simple password reset, but if it's not working or you don't even, maybe you had somebody else set up an account for you and you don't have any of the information, you can create a new account. And so long as you have your WDID, which is also called a facility ID, with our agency, you will be able to create a new like username and password in a new account to complete the termination information. So if you've lost that, it's don't worry, you can still access it. So that's the termination request form. And then on the portal, it combines that with the site closure report. So you fill it out in one new survey. Um, the only thing with the site closure report is we also need photos. Those tend to have to be emailed to us. And then there's on the portal as well, there's what's called a final annual monitoring report. Um, and those three elements need to be submitted or the final annual monitoring report has to be for all tiered sites. If you're conditionally exempt, you don't need to do that. But for most sites, it's those three elements. And then we also check to make sure there's no outstanding invoices. So those will need to be paid as well. So this is what a screenshot of the actual portal. So once you're in here, this is kind of like the main page. This is your dashboard. So you go to create new survey. And then from the list, you select cannabis order termination request form. And this is going to ask you a series of questions. And then, like I said, it includes the site closure report. So you get them both done at once. And we'll ask you questions like, when did cultivation cease? Is there bare soil present? Is there construction activities planned? Things like that. So typically, in an ideal world, the site closure report and that termination report on the portal would be submitted 90 days prior to cultivation activities ending. And that's because we'd like to be able to say, well, you need to revegetate this area, or hey, trash needs to be removed, or, we notice some pesticides that aren't in secondary containment, those need to be put in secondary containment, things like that. A lot of times, this isn't what happened, and a site has already stopped cultivating when they're terminating, or maybe they never cultivated at all. And so, submit those documents to us with the site closure report, either email us or get us some photos of the site. We also look at aerial imagery. And so from that, we'll get a really good understanding of if the site is ready to be terminated or not, or if there's cleanup that still needs to be done. So for a site closure report, this is just a screenshot from the section D of the general order. Like I said, you don't have to read this. Don't feel pressured or worried that you can't read it all. This is all of the questions they ask. So there's like 5 questions, but the fifth question is just a certification that all the information is true and correct. Um, so it's asking, when did cultivation cease? It's asking about, what happened on the site, construction activities, things like that. And then it's also just letting you know that fourth question is just letting you know that if you're a part of tier 1 and tier 2, you need to complete that final annual monitoring report. So this is the guideline. If for whatever reason you want to review this before you get into the portal asks you point blank questions, so you don't have to worry. Anything that it's asking you is a requirement. And so you can, and then you'll certify that on the portal as well. But this is just a screenshot from the general order, so you kind of know beforehand what they're going to be asking you. So like I've now mentioned, we do require site photos. Sometimes sites are really large. We're not expecting, every square inch of the site. We really want photos of, temporary structures or any structures, cultivation areas or proposed cultivation areas if you never actually got to cultivating. Um, we want pictures of if you installed best management practices. Maybe you put in a straw wattle somewhere, or you strawed an area, things like that. We do have the right to do site inspections, um, or you can request a site inspection, and at our discretion, we can decide to go on that inspection. But what we tend to do is use aerial imagery and photos. So this is that third element of the termination, and this is the final annual monitoring report. Again, this is a screenshot from the portal. And you go to create new survey. You go to online cannabis water quality monitoring and reporting program. And then it asks you this question. You can see the screenshot down here at the bottom. It says, enter your facility ID or WDID number, what year you're reporting for. And then from this drop down, you're going to select this is a final monitoring report required to be submitted before terminating. Um, are there any questions before I go into invoices? Are there any questions about the termination process, the termination request form, the site closure, the photos, or the final annual monitoring report?
I'm trying to think of just it just sort of if you could bullet point again just that process from just step
Yeah.
1 to step like 7, just to hear it vocally. That would be really great to get another wrap up of that.
Let me just go to this kind of synopsis page here so they can look at it as well. So there's 3 main elements to terminating. It is the termination request form, which you submit on the portal. Um, and then the second element is the site closure report, which is also done on the portal. And then you submit by via email photo documentation to us of the cultivation area or the proposed cultivation area, temporary structures or any structures on the site. Sometimes we ask for pictures of the roads or if there's slopes on the area, things like that. And then the third element for tiered sites, so tier 1 or tier 2, is you're going to submit a final annual monitoring report that is also going to be on the portal. And all of these reports and documents are really giving us a picture of what the site looks like and what potential water quality issues would be on the site. Do we have to worry about, erosion on the roads? Do we need to worry about um, soil stockpiles that are left loose to the elements, to the wind and the rain. Do we need to worry about, pesticides leaking into the ground because they're not secondarily contained, or, grow bags that have potting soil and potting amendments in them, and, that bag breaking and then that getting onto the, you know, wind and rain again, spreading that and potentially getting into a water course, things like that. So these three documents really give us a full picture of what's going on with the site. And then we look at actual photographs of the site, um, and really review everything so we can get a whole idea of what's going on and if there's any water quality or potential water quality issues.
That's really helpful. Thank you. And then
Yeah.
one follow-up question to that was you were saying that it's in an ideal world, the termination request form would be submitted 90 days prior so that
Hmm.
there's time to plant native seeds and kind of
Hmm.
clear out that area and actually have time to grow and kind of show you.
Yes. And the other really big reason to do it before you terminate, and we run into this fairly regularly, is a site terminates, and they want to sell. Well, once you sell the property, if you haven't terminated the enrollment and the permit, you're in this kind of hard area where now you don't have access to the site to take photos. Or maybe the new landowner has disturbed the area in a way you didn't. Um, and so that looks like disturbed area and it looks like it needs to be, revegetated or whatever to us. And so it's really important, before you sell a property or before it goes too far to really let us know. And I kind of handle all of the termination questions. And, I've walked people through how to complete the final annual monitoring report or something like that. So, if you have questions, if you're thinking of selling a property or you're thinking maybe I need to get out of this business or, whatever it may be, check in with us and we can tell you what needs to be done. And then the other thing is until termination is complete, you're going to continue getting invoiced. So really being aware of the steps, because until we get all the steps and all of those documents, we can't terminate. And so sometimes, we'll get one or two things, but we won't get the third, or we won't get photos, or we'll get photos and we follow up and say, hey, this needs to be dealt with. And then it goes quiet. It's really important to keep in contact, I guess, with us about this process so that nothing gets missed and then you're continuously having to pay until it is solved by termination.
No, that's really helpful, Marissa. It's good to know it's not always a one and done situation. A lot
Right.
of times it can be a back and forth for several weeks before you have everything in place. And so good to keep that on the top, forefront of your mind.
Yeah, exactly. And it can definitely be a conversation. Some of them are cut and dry, but some of them, there's concerns we have, and we have to do our due diligence before we terminate a site. And so it really, we make sure to call, we make sure to email, we try and keep our communication really timely. Uh, but yeah, just to be aware that until you receive what's called the notice of termination letter, that it's not terminated. It's not finalized. You have to receive that letter. Okay, so if there's no more questions about termination, I'm going to go to our last topic, which was invoices. So let me scroll through. Here we go. So we get a lot of questions about invoices, especially when a new letter comes out. Maybe it's a demand for payment, maybe it's just the initial invoice. So we wanted to touch on invoices, um, and we wanted to stress that even if you don't cultivate in a certain year, you are still responsible for paying the invoice because you have the permit coverage. And we kind of mentioned it in the previous topic, but if you start the termination process, but haven't submitted all the documents or haven't answered staff questions or submitted follow-up photos and addressed all of the concerns, uh, excuse me, you are still responsible for those invoices. Um, and then we wanted to also clarify, we've gotten a few questions about this. Um, some, I think DCC and some counties have a fallow option. Um, I'm not sure if that's the case in Nevada County.
Yeah,
Um,
we just recently were able to,
okay.
there is a fallow option, yes.
Okay, so the Central Valley Water Boards does not have a fallow option, which means that, even if you're not cultivating, because our permit is not for the cultivation itself, it's for the related activities, you'll still have the permit coverage and you'll still be responsible for the invoice. So even if you do the fallow option with, say, your county or with, say, DCC, you are still responsible for the water board's invoice because at this time we do not have a fallow option. And then, yeah, this was the next slide. So we get a lot of questions about, what are the annual fees, funds? And so we wanted to spend a little bit of time going over, kind of workload and what our scientific staff and our engineers accomplish. And we have two primary focuses. We have our permitting side, we have our enforcement side. So on the permitting side, staff review the actual applications. Those are when those come in, and you know that review then triggers the notice of applicability to be sent out. Um, Staff review the site information before making changes, like we mentioned, the change of information request form. We have to, verify and do our due diligence on all of those changes. Um, so sometimes that's as simple as, looking up the landowner and land vision, and sometimes it's pulling up aerial imagery, and it can be more complex. And so we spend time making sure that the changes are making that were requested are accurate as well. We also receive those technical documents that we mentioned, the site management plan. There's a nitrogen management plan as well, and then those annual monitoring reports. We obviously review the site termination documentation um, and make sure sites are ready for closure. And then we're here to answer questions. I'll have the contacts up again at the end of the presentation. But we answer invoice questions, we answer questions about termination, we answer questions about the COI, you know, and sometimes there's site-specific questions. We won't give recommendations, but we can tell you what the standards and the requirements are of the general order or direct you to places in the general order where you can learn more about that specific topic. Um, and then on the enforcement side of things, we do conduct warrant inspections in coordination with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and local law enforcement. Um, and staff issues, what's called a notice of violation. We keep in contact with landowners trying to get sites cleaned up and remediated. And we have, an elevated enforcement action as well. So, processing those and staying on top of that as well. And that's to make sure that illegal sites are not allowed to conduct their business unhindered. So, um, we have those two types of focuses or priorities. And so that's kind of a synopsis of what we do. And then for the invoice, the last invoice slide here is just the payment, how to make a payment. Um, we get lots of questions in general about how to make payments. There's two ways you can pay online via a credit card or a debit card. And there's two different websites. And so you'll just follow the correct link depending how you're paying. And there's a lot of questions. Make sure to have your WDID number handy and that invoice number handy because they will ask you that and the exact amount as well. It doesn't pre-fill all of that for you. You have to have those handy. And then if you would like, you are more than welcome to mail a check or money order to the address I listed here. The caveat to that is make sure to include the WDID number and the invoice number on the actual check or money order, and then that makes sure, it's processed in a timely manner and attributed to the right account. Are there any invoice questions?
None for me.
Okay. Um, then so I will show our contact page here. Um, and so if you have any questions, Nevada County is the cases are managed by Maggie Driver. So she's this second one right here. Um, but I also do a lot of fielding phone calls and emails on general topics. And so feel free to reach out to me. If I can't answer the question, I will definitely reach out to Maggie and, or Janae and CC them on an email if that's the case. Um, but please feel free to contact me directly if you have any convert or questions or concerns about how to make an invoice payment or if you have a payment that's past due. I can look all that up. I can look up where you're at in the termination process, or if you haven't started, I can give you directions. And same with the change of information process as well. Um, and then this last slide I have here is helpful links. This is really helpful if you get the PDF copy of the presentation because it's kind of all of the big websites that you would need to go to. We have the cannabis policy, which has the requirements in it. We have the general order, which is the actual permit. We have that cannabis portal, which is where you apply and where you submit the termination request and the site closure report and the final annual monitoring report. I listed our websites. Um, the regional board's general website, Rural Roads Handbook if you have questions about your access road. Um, the stormwater and wastewater permit fee is where you can look up all your invoices on the site and see if anything is past due or um, verify that you made the payment and that it was processed. And then the actual make a payment website as well. So if there are any questions, I can field them now. Um, I do think, future presentations about things like the site management plan or because the site management plan is due 90 days after you've applied. We have a whole presentation on winterization, so what to do before winter hits. So there's definitely some topics out there that we can definitely share. And if you want PDF copies of past presentations on winterization or SMP, we can make those available too.
Yeah, so to get the PDF presentations, they can just email you.
Yep, they'll just email me and I have a little folder, so it's usually pretty quick to just drag and drop it and get it to you.
Perfect. Okay, awesome. Any last, kind of summing it up, um, thoughts that you might have?
I would say for, a final concluding thought is really to stay in communication. We often have it be where a site may be sold and there's a new landowner and the person is the main cultivator is still, say, leasing that property and going about their business. But the landowner changed and we have out of date information. Or, like I said, you're thinking of terminating the permit, but you're not sure. And you think that just because you're not cultivating, you don't have to pay. Like, we can answer a lot of those questions and kind of work with you. So I would just say that critical element to these processes is being in communication, making sure your information's up to date, making sure you're really following through with the whole process.
Awesome. Marissa, that's really good advice. Thank you so much for this awesome presentation that everyone has to deal with at some point, or at least parts of it.
Yep,
Definitely important information to have. So thank you so much for sharing your helpful tips with us.
of course. And let me know if there's any future questions.
Awesome, we will do. And thank you everyone for joining us on another Get Legit webinar with the Nevada County Cannabis Alliance. I'll be posting this on our YouTube channel this week for you to review again and be emailing it to our members. So thank you again for joining us. And thanks, Marissa, so much. You're
All right,
awesome. Bye,
bye.
everyone.